In this line project, we're going to be using straight lines to make shapes, curved lines, and the parent overlapping so that it looks like that one thing is in front of another, creating perspective. This is done using two axes and lines between them. The basic setup rules for making line shapes are: you must have two axes. The two axes must have a common endpoint. Each axis must be divided into the same number of segments. The segments on each axis should be the same size, and the axes do not have to be the same length. The axes can join at any angle except 180 degrees, which would be a straight line. Line shapes are constructed by drawing from one axis to the other. Start by locating the common endpoint of both axes. Now draw a line from the furthest segment on one axis to the nearest on the other axis. You keep repeating this until all the segments have been used. How many segments you have on each axis will change the look of the form and how dense it is or solid. How loose or how dense the segments are can be used to show if the object is close, far away, or show the difference between it and another object that might be near or overlapping. Line shapes can vary greatly. Here you see three examples in which the two axes are longer or shorter than the other. This is possible because each axis has the same number of segments. Obviously, the one on the short axis has to be closer together than the one on the long axis to have the same number on both axes. Axes don't have to meet at right angles. This gives you a variety of shapes. And no matter what their angle is, they can be oriented different ways to your page, so they seem to tumble or turn, or this will help in making more complex compositions. Compound axes make more complex compositions or shapes in themselves. Here you see an example of basically three axes, 1, 2, and then a third one over here. Now when you make line shapes from this, you forget that one of them is there. You only use these two axes. Then forget that this one is here and use these two axes. Thus you will end up with something that looks like this. This middle axis is used twice along with its segments. Taking it a step further, having four axes which make an X shape. They proceed to make line shapes here and line shapes here. Notice how the larger squares appear to be closer than the ones that are smaller. This makes it so the center seems to bulge out towards you and be closer. Here's another axis situation that appears to look like an eye. As you develop the shapes using the same center axis, you end up with a stylized eye. But you also have overlapping of different line shapes. And that's all right. Sometimes it makes a more delicate pattern and more complex. When axes form a closed shape, you tend to end up with a frame of line shapes with their overlappings making new shapes. On your worksheets, you're going to start out making line shapes from some different axis combinations to practice making them, and so that you can see exactly how they change by having a different number of segments, different size, and different angled axes. After you've done that with the help of numbers, I've given you some axes for you to divide into segments and form line shapes. Note I have a hint over here that'll help you figure out how to make equal segments on an axis that are of different size. Please read this. Once you've completed those sheets, you'll move on to compound axes, finding the shapes that they make. Then you'll have an exploratory worksheet. On this one, you're to find as many different axis combinations as you can. Please read over the directions at the top of the page. You can use any set of axes you want here. What I do not want you to do is to take this axis and then this axis and make a shape between it. Then look right next door on the other side and make the same one, only flipped over. Try to use the axis on the other side to find other combinations. This is an exploratory. You are not to make a design out of this. Also, you may forget that there are axes that are in your way or extra points. For instance, on this side, forget this axis is here and draw between this axis and this axis. And for getting segments, you might want to use this axis. Well, this axis to this axis is going to have too many segments down here. So find out how many segments you have here and how many of the segments along this axis you'll need. And then disregard the rest. You can do this throughout the whole project. There are possibly 15 different axis combinations we've found so far. But keep hunting. Students find a new one about every year. In the next section of handouts, we're going to start exploring not only compound axes, but apparent overlapping. Now we say it's apparent because we're working on a flat surface and nothing is really overlapping anything else. What's basically happening is we have two sets of axes that can form line shapes, but one we're going to make it look like it's in front of the other. The way we do that is we make that one look like it's complete but hiding part of the one behind. We will still be using this axis and the segments on it. The way we do that is, when we make the line shape for the one behind, we draw from this axis to the other axis, even if it's behind the first shape, but we do not draw through the first shape. We stop. Even though we may be heading for a point back here, we draw from here, stop, and the straight edge is still going to there. Here we start, we stop at the shape, then we continue on the far side and go to the end of the segment. This allows us to take complex compound axis setups, and by drawing the different shapes in order, we come up with something that looks like we have perspective, or we have something that's in front of another. One thing overlaps another shape. To practice this, you have a handout that has a square with diagonals through it. You are to find 5 different axis combinations from the axes shown here. Now, note one thing. You don't have to use all of one side. There's a little mark here halfway. And this diagonal is divided by the other diagonal. So that might hint that you don't have to use all of one diagonal for one of the possible axis combinations. As you complete this sheet, you are to use apparent overlapping, which we just saw. That means that if you draw a line shape using 2 axes, and then you draw another line shape using other axes, and one goes behind the first shape, you should stop drawing as you hit the first shape so that it appears the first one is in front of the second one. Now in some cases they won't be behind other shapes, and that's fine. Try and find 5 different axes.
Now you're ready to make your own compositions using line shapes.